There is a place buried deep within the mountains, a village that exists only in whispers. The locals call it Cromholm, but most simply refer to it as the Forgotten Village. No maps show its location, and those who try to find it never return. They say Cromholm is cursed, a place where time has stopped, and the air is heavy with the souls that never left. In 1964, a young couple, David and Laura, set out on a hiking trip in search of the village. They had heard the stories and laughed them off as silly folklore. Determined to find the truth, they made their way through the dense forests and jagged cliffs, armed with little more than a map scrawled by an old, jittery man they met in a nearby town. His last words to them before they left were strange: "Don't stay past sunset." On the third day of their trek, as the daylight began to fade and the forest grew silent, they stumbled upon it, Cromholm. At first glance, it appeared abandoned. Crumbling stone cottages lined narrow dirt streets, overgrown with weeds and vines. The air was thick, heavy, and strangely still. No wind blew, and the birds that had accompanied them throughout their journey had gone silent. Laura felt uneasy immediately. "Maybe we should turn back," she whispered, clutching David's arm. But David, ever the skeptic, insisted they explore. "Come on, we came all this way. Let's at least look around." As they ventured deeper into the village, they noticed something odd. Despite its dilapidated appearance, there were signs of life, or at least, of something. Fresh footprints in the dirt, a flickering lantern inside one of the homes, and a faint, haunting melody carried on the still air. It sounded like an old lullaby, one that chilled Laura to her core. "This place doesn't feel right, David," she pleaded. But David was too intrigued. He led them into what looked like the town's church, a small, decrepit building with shattered stained glass windows and a door that groaned on its hinges. Inside, the air was colder, almost freezing. The pews were covered in dust, but at the far end of the room stood a figure, a woman, cloaked in black, her back turned to them. "Excuse me," David called out, his voice echoing unnaturally in the small space. The woman didn't move. Laura grabbed David's hand. "We need to go. Now." David took a step toward the woman. "Hello." The woman slowly turned. Her face, though obscured by shadows, was pale, too pale, and her eyes were sunken, hollow. She opened her mouth, and a low, guttural whisper escaped her lips. "You shouldn't have come." Suddenly, the church door slammed shut with a deafening crash. The temperature in the room dropped further, and the once weak melody of the lullaby grew louder, more insistent. The walls seemed to pulse with it, vibrating with a strange energy. Laura screamed, pulling David toward the door, but it wouldn't budge. The woman began to move toward them, her feet dragging unnaturally across the floor. "You shouldn't have come," she repeated, her voice now a distorted echo, growing louder and more terrifying with each repetition. Panic surged through David as he fumbled with the door, trying desperately to get it open. Laura could feel something closing in around them, a presence she couldn't see but could feel, an oppressive, dark force. The air grew thick, suffocating, as if the village itself was trying to consume them. Suddenly, the door flew open, and they bolted into the night, the church bell ringing behind them, though the bell tower had been empty for decades. As they ran through the village, they saw more figures emerging from the shadows, men, women, children, all with the same hollow eyes and deathly pale faces. They stood motionless, watching them with twisted smiles. David and Laura ran, not stopping until they reached the edge of the forest. The moment they crossed the tree line, the village behind them vanished into the fog, as if it had never existed. They didn't stop running until they reached the town. Breathless and terrified, they tried to explain what had happened, but no one believed them. The villagers simply shook their heads and muttered about the forgotten village. David and Laura never spoke of that night again. But something followed them back, something unseen but felt. At night, they would hear the faint sound of the lullaby drifting through their home, and sometimes, in the corners of their vision, they would see pale figures standing just beyond the shadows. Weeks passed, and David grew distant, withdrawn. He became obsessed with the village, researching its history and finding accounts of others who had tried to find it. One night, he disappeared. Laura found his journal lying open on the kitchen table, with one final entry scribbled hastily across the page. "I can hear them. They're calling me back." They never found David's body, but every so often, people say they see him wandering the forests near the mountains, his eyes hollow, his skin pale, whispering the same warning over and over. You shouldn't have come. If you ever hear stories about the forgotten village, heed the warnings. Don't go looking for it. And if you do find it, whatever you do, don't stay past sunset.